Yeah, when I talk to people about how they become a vegan, often there's an event that happened. Could be a documentary they saw, or a book they read, or something this dramatic happened to me. In my case, it did happen physically. I actually had an accident. I fell down the stairs when I was walking. I was working too fast and suddenly knocked my head and I got unconscious. Yeah, veganism is not a new thing. We always been vegan. Even in my book, on the first chapters, I talk that I think it's even biological. It's not just cultural in human life. We find it in other animals. The veganism, which is this idea of doing no harm to others. Yes, I develop in my book this concept of black footprint, basically derive it from the carbon footprint, which is a common concept now that most people know about it, which is basically related to climate change. Is this contribution in carbon, which is a greenhouse effect, is a gas that creates a greenhouse, therefore warms the planet, and like many others, like methane. And so when you measure the effect that you having in a practice or your own behavior into the climate crisis, you quantify how much carbon you or other greenhouse gases are producing, and that's with the term carbon footprint.
Welcome to the Better Life for Animals podcast, where we amplify the voices of animal advocates, sanctuaries, and changemakers working toward a kinder, more compassionate world. Through powerful stories and expert insights, we shine a light on the efforts to rescue, protect, and advocate for animals. Be sure to subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. Every follower helps us reach more people. And support animal sanctuaries. Enjoy the conversation.
Jordi Casamitjana is a vegan zoologist and author originally from Catalonia, who has resided in the UK for several decades. Throughout his career, he has been deeply involved in various aspects of animal protection, dedicating himself to the cause through scientific research, undercover investigations, animal welfare consulting, and animal protection campaigning. Jordi has been an ethical vegan since 2002, and in 2020, he achieved a significant milestone by securing legal protection for ethical vegans in Great Britain against discrimination. This landmark ruling came through an employment tribunal case that garnered widespread global attention. Now a freelance content writer, Jordi contributes to several vegan and animal-focused organizations, and he is also the author of the book Ethical Vegan, A Personal and Political Journey to Change the World, where he shares his insights and experiences in advocating for ethical veganism and animal rights. Jordi, welcome to the podcast. I very much appreciate this. I loved your book, Ethical Vegan. Congratulations. And I thought we would start with your knowledge of wasps. Today, I saw these guys on social media. They were removing wasps by basically taking a container and enclosing with water in it, and they put it up on top onto the ceiling where the wasps basically dropped to their death. And I immediately thought of you. And I thought, oh, can you tell us why wasps are amazing creatures who, like all animals, deserve so much better?
Well, wasps are not different than anybody else in this world in the sense that they are just here. They have their hopes and aspirations. They grow, they move, they like things, they dislike other things. No difference than anybody else. But for humans, humans tend to hate them because they can't exploit them in any way like they do with bees. They sting, they're afraid of them, they don't like them. So they are persecuted everywhere in the world. They are either feared or they are either killed. And that's why I started to study them, because I thought, well, first, not many people would be studying them. But second, there must be something more than just a dangerous creature there. And when I began studying them for my PhD, I'm a zoologist, I was amazed. I was amazed to discover this whole civilization. They are so clever. Actually, they're my favorite animal now because they have so many skills. They can build nests of paper. They created paper before humans created paper. Possibly humans saw was doing it and then got inspired and did it themselves. They are able to grow these societies. They organize, they change, they have roles. Some of them protect the entrance, and then when they turn, they change turns, and somebody else is the guard. So they have an organized society. They're able to survive in many countries and in harsh conditions. And like any animal, they are very intelligent. They're able to judge the world. And that's how I encountered them. When I was studying them for the first time, I realized that they were judging me as much as I was judging them. And that 1-inch individual was so small, but was so clever, and actually judged me much better than all the humans I had encountered up to that point, that I felt I had to study them for a long time. And I did it for 10 years. So they are amazing creatures.
I thought so. I was so taken with the story where there's a wasp that's looking you straight in the eye, and you're looking at him, and he's deciding, you know what, I'll leave this one alone.
Yeah, looking at her, she was
her, female. Yes.
She was the guard, and she was basically the one that started my journey towards veganism, because at that point I was just a zoologist trying to study animals, and that experience was just essentially a guard outside the nest, which their job is to protect the nest. So if they see anybody coming in or too close, they will raise the alarm, and everybody could come and stink whoever is getting closer. So I knew that, so I was paying attention to her, and I knew that how she would alarm the others, because she would move the wings in a particular way and leave in the air a pheromone that is an alarm pheromone. I knew this, so I was nervous looking at her. And she saw me. She looked with an antenna. I could see that she clearly saw me, was smelling me and looking at me, and was starting to move the wings a little bit. And I thought, oh, that's it. I need to run. But then she moved the wings back, and then she relaxed and carried on with the job. So clearly she judged me. She understood I meant no harm, and she understood everything about me in a couple of seconds. And that was the moment I thought, okay, we are judging these creatures completely wrong. And if we are judging them wrong, imagine everybody else that's bigger and closer to us, like mammals and birds. So therefore, I need to stop just observing them. I need to start protecting them. And that's why the Jordi Animal Protectionist began. And from that, at one point, I became vegan years later. It took me quite a long time. But that was the path that led me to start protecting animals.
I want to talk about the monkey sanctuary and move into sanctuaries in general. I think we would all like to see them as transitory spaces, but until there's a major shift, we need more places and more funds to protect and provide shelter. Tell us about your time working with the monkeys.
Yeah, that was 5 years of my life. They were amazing years. That is in Loo, in Cornwall, the southwest of the United Kingdom. That there's a sanctuary. At the time it was called the Monkey Sanctuary. Now it's called Wild Futures. And at the time they only had one species of monkeys, the woolly monkey, the Amazonian woolly monkey. Now they have many more. And the whole thing at the time was just trying to see whether they could give those monkeys a better life, because they all were descendants of pet monkeys. There was a time in Britain that having woolly monkeys as pets was a fashion, and people would just buy one and they would die. They would never survive long, and they ordered another one. They were all taken directly from the Amazon in South America. And there was a music teacher, a guitar player, John Williams, and Len Williams, John Williams was his son, Len Williams, that he thought, that's wrong. He had one of those. I thought, I think probably need to collect a few and then start a sanctuary somewhere. And he moved to Cornwall, collect one of those, and put them together in a much more natural environment. There they started to breed, and they started to collect, and his idea was to rescue them from the pet trade. But of course, at one point, generations later, that was in 1964, a long time, all the keepers that were actually the first keepers were the students, the music students he had, and then other people joined in, and they all lived together in a community in a very 60s and 70s style, together with the monkeys in the same house, sharing the space. Eventually, everybody thought, well, yeah, few have been born here, but that's still not where they should be. They belong to the Amazon. They should not be here. Let's see whether we can take them back to the Amazon. And that's when I joined the team. I joined the team as a zoologist, trying to help the rehabilitation project aimed to return the entire colony back to Brazil where they belong, and that I worked hard to achieve that. But eventually we couldn't do it because we discovered a virus, a woolly monkey hepatitis virus, a specific virus for this species, that will make it impossible to transfer the colony to Brazil because the authorities would not allow an infected monkey to obviously enter the country. We didn't know where this virus came from. It was natural in the population. It was acquired in captivity. But that means the dream to return then had to stop, and then the sanctuary moved more into a rescue mode rather than the rehabilitation mode, and has stopped the breeding and started to rescue other pets of other species. And that's what is at the moment. It's a general primate sanctuary where they keep ex-pets animals and they give them a better life.
You're listening to Better Life for Animals podcast. Our mission is to amplify the voices of animal advocates, sanctuaries, and changemakers working toward a kinder, more compassionate world. But we can't do it alone. We need your help. First of all, go ahead and subscribe to this channel wherever you're watching or listening. And then get involved by visiting betterlifeforanimals.com. That's betterlifeforanimals.com. Be sure to check out our blog, learn more about incredible sanctuaries, and explore our book section, where 100% of net proceeds from book sales are donated to sanctuaries. Every action you take helps to make a difference. And remember, subscribe to this channel. And now, back to the show.
I know you've spent time studying animals inside of zoos. Your book mentioned 3 things that captivity does to animals. Please tell me about your time in zoos and what does captivity do to an animal?
Yeah, precisely after leaving the sanctuary, because obviously my job was to rehabilitate the monkeys, but that wasn't possible. I moved on. But of course, I had already experienced keeping wild animals in captivity. So I had knowledge, direct first-hand knowledge, how difficult it is. So I started to work with the Born Free Foundation in the zoo check department that basically campaigns against zoos. And part of my job was to visit many zoos, investigate them, inspect them, make reports, try to close as many as possible, and managed to close 5. And in all of them, I found the same situation, that animals suffer in captivity no matter how much care you put into it. They suffer. Sanctuaries often is the last resource, but it's not the perfect world for a sanctuary, for an animal that is wild. An animal is wild requires the wild. That's where the animal evolved, and anything else would always damage and harm the animal. There are 3 things captivity does, as you mentioned, to all animals. One is space. There is a reduction of space. It's always going to be less space than in the wild, much less. Then is stimuli. It's always going to have fewer stimuli than the evolution and the senses have been evolved to receive every day. And finally, choice. It will have fewer choices. Therefore, the brain, which is designed to make decisions about life, and see the good experience about the experience and make decisions about that, they cannot apply that as often as in the wild because most of the decisions are taken for them. And that over the years obviously affect their minds in such a way that they're crazy. They completely lose their minds. There's this general concept called zoocosis, which is this mental disease that happens when you're condemned to put in captivity for life. And no matter which species, then some of them deal with these different ways. Others, they deal very internally, others very externally. Others you can see clearly. They pace or they have stereotypic behavior, this repetitive behavior that show us that they are having difficulties in coping with this life. Others, they internalize it, that they hardly move or they moved a lot. But after me visiting the zoos, I started to learn how to identify that suffering and record it and use it in campaigning in order to campaign against captivity.
I have to say that when I read your story of your legal battle, I was glued to each page. Thank you for taking that on, because I could see how very difficult that was for you personally. It took a lot of courage. And even today, it's not easy finding a way to diversify a portfolio and ensure it's supporting compassionate choices. It seems that there is some awareness around fossil fuels, but without taking deliberate steps, the indifference around animal agriculture continues to rule the day. Can you talk about the carbon footprint versus the blood footprint?
Yes, I develop in my book this concept of blood footprint, basically derive it from the carbon footprint, which is a common concept now that most people know about, which is basically related to climate change, is this contribution in carbon, which is a greenhouse effect, is a gas that creates a greenhouse, therefore warms the planet, and like many others, like methane. And so when you measure the effect that you having in a practice or your behavior into the climate crisis, you quantify how much carbon you or other greenhouse gases are producing, and that's what the term carbon footprint. Then I thought, well, when we do any other things, with any decision we make, anything we buy, anything we do, will have other consequences in addition to warm the planet. Consequences of suffering. Other creatures might be suffering because of our choices. Maybe we might harm them directly or indirectly. So we could also measure that. Let's call it the blood footprint, the amount of suffering that our decisions are inflicting in other creatures, either suffering while they're alive or being killed or being the life being affecting negatively in one way or another. So obviously that's difficult to quantify, but my idea was to create a concept that people might understand, because when they already understand the carbon footprint, they already understand that they can change their behavior and their choices to minimize and reduce that footprint. Well, they could do the same with any harm. And the consequence of doing that, if you accept that you're harming other sentient beings and you know that you have options and you know that you could choose the one that harms the less, then if you consistently choose the one that harms the less, that's what a vegan is. A vegan, an ethical vegan in particular, is somebody who consistently and makes an effort to reduce the blood footprint as much as possible within the circumstances of that person.
We know, of course, that every single animal, from be a fish to a bee, they all get 1 point, right? So the number would be quite large.
Absolutely. I would love to try to quantify it somehow.
Yes.
But it's more easy to do than you might think, because if you want to quantify, for instance, a farm, just count how many individuals are there.
Good point.
They all are suffering. Then how many things are happening? They don't have the right food. That's points. They don't have the right environment. That's points. You could add points and then compare it with another farm, or compare it with another, and then compare it with not having farms. Compare it with not using horses for transport. Compare it not using animals in entertainment. And then you will notice the difference of the blood footprint.
I love that idea. If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Jordi Casamitjana, and this is Better Life for Animals. Jordi, I love how you wove your own personal story alongside the history of veganism. This book is an incredible history lesson. I really recommend it. I also like how you never shirk from exposing the miseries and the cruelty, such as with bullfighting. Would you say it's becoming less acceptable to torture animals for sport, or are we still just turning a blind eye, as in the case of rodeos?
I think it's becoming more acceptable to know that is wrong, which is not the same to say that is stopping. So there are people start to feel guilty about it, but they still carry on doing it, or carry on supporting it, or don't condemn it as they should. There are in areas in the world where this has actually translated in more people mobilizing against these things and changing the world. I mean, bullfighting was banned in Colombia a few months ago. So that has happened in Catalonia, where I'm coming from. We banned bullfighting as well. So there are places in the world where people do understand it, people mobilize themselves and make a change. But then when you look on the entire planet, you win here, you lose there. But what you do have is a recognition that there is a problem, and that is increasing. That doesn't necessarily translate into a change in policy or in law, but that's the first step. If people don't see a problem, they will never change things. So the first thing is show that the problem exists, and that is obviously easier to do now with internet and social media, and that's the first step. So we are actually going in the right direction, but still quite far to achieve success across the board. But from all the subjects, perhaps bullfighting is the one we advance the most, because in my experience, there is a very well-coordinated anti-bullfighting movement, which I helped to coordinate, and that's led to tangible successes in many parts of the world. But we still have any other animal exploitation industry, vivisection, food production, all those are still quite far, but it's the same idea. Animals suffer. People need to know that. People need to realize there is an alternative, and people need to mobilize and act to change the world.
Your personal switch to ethical veganism came after you had a dream, which I find fascinating because I personally love dream work. And I know you've written a book about that. and my copy is on its way. Can you tell us more about that? Because we all have our moment, don't we?
Yeah, when I talk to people about how they become a vegan, often there's an event that happened. Could be a documentary they saw, or a book they read, or something this dramatic happened to me. In my case, it did happen physically. I actually had an accident. I fell down the stairs when I was walking. I was working too fast and suddenly knocked my head and I got unconscious. And paramedics came, and I didn't know this, but when you're unconscious for an accident, you also dream, not just when you sleep. So I had to dream while I was unconscious, and then the paramedics woke me up. And the first thing I said to the paramedic is, I had this amazing dream. And the paramedic stopped me and said, yeah, you will tell me later. Tell me now, you can see my fingers, all these things that they do to see that you're still okay. And while he was doing that, I forgot the dream. I completely forgot it. I knew there was an important, interesting dream. I forgot it. But the memory of having had a dream I didn't remember, that nagged me for a while. And I eventually thought, I need to take a break, a holiday, to see whether I can remember that dream. And so I did and I was not vegan at the time. I was a meat eater, not even vegetarian. So I found an island at the north of Scotland in winter, and I spent 23 days in isolation in a cottage there, trying to remember the dream. And I did remember the dream, and I wrote a novel called The Demon's Trial under the pseudonym J.C. Costa, which basically explains what happened to me in that island. But essentially, the novel is the dream, is that I dreamed how the animals that had failed had put me on trial for having failed. So it was a journey of guilt, of recognizing that I was trying to help animals, but yet I had failed. And of course, I was a meat eater, but already working in animal protection. And that was a big contradiction, trying to help some animals and eat others. So after having written the novel in the island, and after 23 days, I came back to the mainland in the UK, and I was an ethical vegan. So that process of 23 days of analyzing my subconscious through the dream that told me the things I had done wrong made me change completely and become an ethical vegan. And that was more than 20 years ago.
Well, I have this dream that we will have you back on to talk about that book. I'm sure it's wonderful. By the time vegan utopia arrives, only a small controlled population of farm animals will be kept in sanctuaries. They'll become protected animal reserves with ex-domesticated animals becoming feral. And the animals we took from nature may eventually return to it. Now, this sounds like a very long-range plan given current circumstances. And yet, given how quickly resources are being squandered, this could be right on the horizon. What do you think?
Well, the vegan world is the future that we vegans dream about all the time. And I think that's important. We should not forget that, because veganism is not just something that you do for you. It's something you do for the world. And if you're a perfect vegan, living in a perfect vegan community, isolated from everybody else, animals continue suffering. You haven't made much of a difference. If you do have become a vegan, it's because you want to change the world. And changing the world is the most difficult thing to do, because the world is already complicated. It might take many generations for that to happen, but you need to have a vision. You need to know which direction you're going so you don't lose track through that long process. So it's good to know how it would look like. And that's what I did in my book. My last chapter in my book is this vision of how I imagine the vegan world will be and how we will get there. But yeah, sanctuaries is one element of it. Obviously now, most animals that we deal with that are domestic are not in sanctuaries, but in animal exploitation industries, farms, vivisection, etc. But if the process of veganizing the world progresses and more vegans reach a critical mass, so they start to elect vegan politicians, that they are able to vote for vegan policies that become laws and things, and the percentage of vegans grow and everywhere, not just in selected countries. At one point, it will become normal to develop these policies, so there will be less subsidies to animal agriculture and vivisection, and that means many farmers will switch from farming animals to farming vegetables and probably progress and be richer doing this way, and then that obviously will help the climate. And that means there will be less breeding of animals at the moment, completely bred, but in order to be products. At one point, when it will be difficult to get a profit from that, there will be less breeding, and therefore it will be more manageable to start to have sanctuaries where we can move those from farms that would want to move to dairy production, from dairy production to plant production, rather than kill them all, then might move them to sanctuaries, and eventually, of course, the breeding should stop in sanctuaries. As all sanctuaries, there's no breeding. You don't want to create another creature in the world. But there might be a time that is manageable logistically to do so. And even if you don't, then if you have enough space to give them more freedom, then at one point they might just return to the species they used to be before they were domesticated if you let them alone. So it's all a process that might take a long time, but it's all feasible from a point of view of knowledge and technique. So it's just the political will is what we need.
Doesn't seem like we have the political will at this time. However, that could change. We could just go the other direction, I think, with a lot of unhappiness and seeing things not being, there's no protections. The protections seem to be loosening. All the things that have been built seem at this time to be in peril. However, as you have said in your book, this concept of veganism has been with us since the beginning of time, and so it will prevail. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, veganism is not a new thing. We always been vegan. Even in my book, on my first chapters, I talk that I think it's even biological. It's not just cultural in human life. We find it in other animals. The veganism, which is this idea of doing no harm to others, we give it a name veganism now, but before it was created in 1944 by the Vegan Society, the idea already existed. The name wasn't there. And the way people interpret it varied from culture to culture, but spontaneously came out from different parts of the world, the Middle East, India, Greece. Millennia ago, they were already talking about this concept of ahimsa. Ahimsa is a Sanskrit word that means do no harm or non-violence, which is basically the philosophical basis and roots of veganism, and also an important tenet of many religions like the Jainism and Buddhism and Hinduism. So the idea of not harming was already there, and people was trying to figure out how to apply it. And some said, well, let's not eat meat, let's not do this. Eventually, the Vegan Society in 1944 said, well, let's not eat meat nor milk nor honey nor eggs, something that some groups had tried. So eventually, basically what happens is the idea matures and gets closer to the original concept of not harming. And that's where we are now at the moment. So basically, veganism, as we understand now, is a modern manifestation of ahimsa, which had existed before. But I also argue that even before humans, this idea of not harming was already in nature. And you could see animals choosing between not harming and harming, often choosing not harming because it's more beneficial for them. Cooperation was already in nature, still we find it. So there was always a drive in nature, or fight between being selfish and fight all the time and get all resources for you, and cooperate and being helpful and respectful with others. And this fight always been there, and therefore veganism represents the cooperation and the respect side of that fight. And I think it will prevail because given time, always cooperation and helping and being resourceful and being respectful pays off more than just being selfish and being abusive and absorbing and consuming everything. But it might take a long time before it becomes the vegan world.
But it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. And the more of us that are out here speaking on this and demonstrating how ahimsa works and how we don't have to hurt things. And we live in actually a pretty fortunate time in that we don't have to make those cruel choices anymore. We have all sorts of healthy alternatives and they're right there. At least lots of us do. So I appreciate what you're saying, and I just loved your book. And I'm wondering, now that it's 2025, what are your thoughts in the current situation, and tell us what you're working on.
Well, one of the things I discovered in my book by looking at the history, looking back, and then trying to project what I saw into the future, is that I realized everything goes in cycles. Nothing goes completely in one direction. So I think veganism has been always there, but there are periods where it's more out there, periods where they're suffering more the oppression of the non-vegan side, what we call the carnist world. And now I think we might be in one of those post-bubbles, because few years ago, veganism really was growing incredibly fast and everybody was super optimistic about it. And now it doesn't seem that it's growing that fast. And many things have changed politically that makes us think, well, we seem to be going in the opposite direction. That seems to be the case. But that's the end of a bubble. So there will be another time where will be another growth. So it's a cycle. It goes up, it goes down, but every time it goes high in average. So every time there's a little bit more vegans than before. Every time there's a bit more knowledge about it. So, but we should not just expect a completely exponential growth. And once we know that the veganism exists and we tell others that everybody will assume and understand it as fast as we did. No, seems to be going into a bad political situation in a post-truth area with all the things that are going on. But that will pass. That will pass, and we will carry on later on. And I think we should be grateful that we're actually going out from the bubble, because the bubble is not real. When things grow too fast, they don't really end up in the minds of and the attitudes of people. People just learn the behavior, but they don't learn the philosophy. So a lot of people be pretending to be vegan because they behave like vegan doesn't mean they're vegan. To be a vegan, you need to change your approach to life, your understanding of respect with other creatures, not just the behavior. Behavior comes automatically when you change your philosophy. But we thought that everybody would become vegan if we were told them what to eat, but that's not like that. You need to tell them the difference between right and wrong, the difference between harming and not harming, and let them choose what to eat. And they will then choose as you do, because right and wrong will be the same for everyone. So it's good that we are, in a way, becoming more real now. And some of the problems that seem to be solved, they were not really solved. They were superficially addressed, but not solved, because you need to change the problems from the roots. And that will happen. So each generation will be closer to change the problems from the roots. But it will take a while. So I'm optimistic. I'm always optimistic. But we are not necessarily in a very good part of that cycle at the moment. So, but doesn't mean I'm not optimistic, because I know that this is temporal and it is ephemeral. No, it will not last for long. And that means the next phase will be better for us.
Once again, that's why history is so valuable. I love how you tell vegans to stay in the mainstream as a model that, that everyday normal life is achievable, instead of, just living in our own little bubbles where everybody just agrees with us. We have to get out there and set an example and offer choices and try and make one more vegan. So I love that. I think that's the best way to help end animal exploitation in the end is to share it. And I know you talk about that in your book. And you also give a myriad of examples in every area, from healthcare to products, hair products, what have you, all these different options and different ways that you can live a more compassionate life. Are there the top 3 that you offer to new people that are vegan curious?
Well, yes, my book is a journey from the past to the future. And at the middle of these two is the present. So in the present, I explain how I deal with all the issues. As an example, of course, I live in a particular place in London, in the UK, which is one of the best countries for vegans and one of the best cities. I know that in other places it will be far more difficult, but I only have my own experience, so I only can share that. But as an example that anybody will find in their place, ways to deal with the vegan problem, which is any decision you make, you need to be sure you choose right. You choose the most vegan-friendly option. So you need knowledge about the products you use, you need knowledge about the companies that run them, the consequences of who you support to, and then make an analysis of how many animals have suffered then, that blood footprint I was taking before, and choose the one that minimizes the most. But it's easy to do when you have the knowledge. Problems, people don't necessarily know the knowledge when they begin the vegan journey, but they'll acquire it with learning and sharing the experience with other vegans. That's why it's important for vegans to help each other all the time and communicate information, because we need to learn the consequences of our actions. But what you do that in any place is easy. Food is easy for me. Food, for me, today in the 21st century, having vegan options is so easy in modern societies. But if you are in a place that they don't have that many alternatives to milk, or they don't have fave meats as in modern Western societies, don't worry, because these are not really what you're aiming for. The the fake meat is a transition from meat eating to veganism. At one point, like myself, you don't eat those things anymore. You eat plants, fruits, vegetables, grains, all the things will be available wherever you are in the world. So that the third option, I would say, is go to the plant, go directly to the vegetable, the most natural as possible. So you can have it. So if it's organic, better. If it's veganic, even better than that. But then we have all the cosmetics and household products. They are now labeled whether they've been tested on animals or not. And all these things also help you. You don't have to do that much research. You only have to read the label. And that's easy. But there are things that are difficult, like medical care, medicines, maybe are tested on animals. And if you're ill, you don't have any other choice. Then you have to take the medicine that was tested on animals. Or banking, for instance. There's not really any bank that is completely ethical these days. There's always invested in something that is quite wrong. So there are things that are easy, like food and clothes. It's all labeled for you. Things that are difficult, like banking and healthcare. But that doesn't matter. It's the effort you make what counts. How much you make it, how much you learn to make a distinction between one product and another and choose the one that minimizes your blood footprint.
Well, I really enjoy this time speaking with you, Jordi. It's been such a pleasure. Can you tell our listeners how we can find and support you?
Yeah, you can find me in all social media. I'm present there. My name is Jordi Casamitjana. You just Google it and you will find in my social media. I have also a website, jordi.casamitjana, Animal Protection Consult, between hyphens, between Animal Protection and Consult. But the website is just one part. The easiest thing is just social media, just LinkedIn, Twitter or X now, Instagram. You just put my name there and they will find me.
Okay. Thank you. You have been listening to Better Life for Animals with our guest, Jordi Casamitjana. It has been such a pleasure. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for joining us on the Better Life for Animals podcast. Together, we can create a world where all beings are treated with dignity, respect, and care. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. It helps us reach more people and spread awareness about the incredible work happening in animal sanctuaries. You can also share this episode with friends and fellow advocates to keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep speaking up, taking action, and making a difference for the animals.